Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected. This is Katie, your host, and today we're going to talk to Heather, who is diagnosed with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or vEDS. Hey Heather.
Hey, Katie, and hey, guys who are listening. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to do this.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear more about your story.
Well, I so appreciate just the work that you're doing in general and just getting these stories out. Because one of the things that really hit me hard after the diagnosis was I don't know anyone who has this, and I don't know anyone who has gone through these same things. And vascular EDS manifests differently in every patient, but I mean, just to hear different people and how their stories have evolved and how they've kind of walked through this is incredibly helpful for me, and I know it is for our vets community. So thank you so much for what you're doing with staying connected.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's why I started doing it. So, how are you diagnosed with vEDS?
So my diagnosis came after a slew of major medical events that happened in the fall of 2015. And in reality, with many of us who have vEDS, I mean, there were warning signs that happened much before then, and even major medical events before then. But that fall of 2015 was the time when my doctors really said, okay, something is going on here. And so I'd had, I guess, let's see, in July of 2015, I found out that I was pregnant, which was a total shock because my husband and I have one son together. He'll be 13 in November, and we didn't think that we could have any more children. And he came with a little bit of help with fertility, and that was a challenge in itself. And so we were really shocked to find out that I was pregnant. And then we went to the doctor for the first ultrasound appointment, and there was no heartbeat. And so she said that, I'd likely, that the baby had died early on, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, but my body had not recognized it yet. And so I had not yet started to miscarry. I was at 9 weeks then.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so she said, you have two options. We can take care of it and do a DNC procedure here in the office, or you can go home and see if your body will kick in and do it naturally. And I'm pretty big hippie, so I was like, I think I can do this on my own. And I didn't do natural childbirth with my son. I had a C-section. That's another bed story. Before all of this happened, but anyway, so I said, yeah, okay, I really don't want the medical procedures. Medical procedures already kind of freaked me out, and so I said, let me do this on my own. And so I did. So at 14 weeks, my body started miscarrying, and that was, in hindsight, that was a really traumatic process, because it took about 6 weeks for my body to fully clear all the tissue and everything. It was, the bulk of it happened in one day, but then it just took a really long process for everything to get completely out. And so I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone, but I think, my husband and I both agree, and we'll never know, but that it probably was still better for me than having a medical procedure requiring tools and doctors that had no idea that I had vascular EDS at the time. And so, we're thankful for that, but then after the miscarriage, I started having this, just this roller coaster of major medical events. And the doctors think that the miscarriage kind of sent my body into a bit of I can't remember the wording that they use, but a bit of an emergency kind of a huge flare with my connective tissues. And so about a month after the miscarriage was complete, I had a lot of kidney pain and abdomen pain. And so I went in, and they said, oh, you're just dehydrated and you just had a miscarriage and you probably have a kidney infection. And so I stayed in the ER for a couple of hours, and they gave me fluids, and then really couldn't find anything with their basic tests. And so they sent me home. And I was feeling better by having fluids, and I was feeling better. Well, then I came back. I ended up having more intense pain, and came back and come to find out that I was having a kidney infarction. So I had two aneurysms that were flaring up, a mesenteric aneurysm and a renal aneurysm, and both of those were kind of freaking out. And so that renal flare, that renal artery, was cutting off the blood supply to my kidney.
So that's what an infarction is?
Yes,
Okay.
and the way, and I'm telling you this because I'm obviously I don't know anything about medicine. I'm just spitting back out what my doctors have told me, and I was trying to absorb. But the way that the nurse so patiently described it to me was, okay, an infarction is kind of like when you have a heart attack. They call that a myocardial infarction, and so because it's cutting off blood supply to your heart. So same
Okay.
thing with your kidney. That that aneurysm in my renal artery was blocking the blood flow into my right kidney, and so it was cutting off the blood supply, and so I lost about 10% of my kidney tissue, and that is
Wow.
called a kidney infarction. And I will tell you that if you have an 8-year-old son at home and you come home and tell him that you have a kidney infarction, the only word that he is going to hear is fart. So, it was just a little bit of, levity that we needed. But he
Hmm.
just, I mean, he, every time we said that word, he would just start laughing. And
That is
gosh,
funny.
we needed laughter. So yeah, so we had the kidney infarction, and then I had this really fantastic doctor that was on call in the ER, and he was just really determined to not take no for an answer. And I think that he recognized, that when you hear vascular EDS, think, what is it they say? Think what is the zebra thing? Think something not hoofbeats. What do they
Oh,
say? What do we
yeah.
say?
When you hear a hoofbeat, don't think of a horse. Like when they're taught in medical school, they're taught that when they hear hoofbeats, don't think of a zebra, think of a horse, because it's the most common thing that's going to be.
Right. And I think he was one of those doctors that was really committed to thinking, you know what, this is not a kidney infection. Something really odd is going on here with this patient, and I'm pretty determined to figure it out. And ultimately, he didn't figure it out, but he did send us on the right path that started that. And so he, took me through every medical test in the book to figure out why I was having all of this pain. And they put me in a wing in the hospital that was it was almost like a ghost town, because they didn't know where to stick me, because they didn't really
Uh-huh.
know what was going on. They just knew this girl's in a lot of pain and she's lost 10% of her kidney tissue and something's going on here, and she's had these aneurysm flare ups. And so I spent a couple days to kind of get in the hospital to get over the pain and go through every medical test that they could.
Hmm.
And ultimately, he said, okay, I'm going to give you he assigned me a rheumatologist, a local rheumatologist who is familiar with um, a, a condition called vasculitis. And so that's what I was initially diagnosed with. And vasculitis is an inflammation, an infection in your vascular tissues. It's an autoimmune thing. And
Okay.
so um, that's what they thought that I had. And so he came in, and he was looking at my medical history, which up until that point had included what I've just discussed. And then it also included a perforated colon in 2010, which sent me into septic shock. And I had a temporary ileostomy put in, and then they removed that a few months later. So he's looking at, my fall of 2015, all these events that are happening. And then, okay, 5 years prior, her colon ruptured. And then 4 years prior to that, in 2006, my son was born prematurely. He was born 6 weeks early. Not because I ever went into labor, but because my membranes ruptured early.
Hmm.
And when I had the C-section, they had I had to have a C-section because my body never kicked into labor, even though they kept forcing me, pumping me with pitocin to kind of speed up the labor. My body was like, "Yeah, we're not ready for labor yet." The rest of my body wasn't. My womb was like, "Yeah, I'm not holding this baby anymore."
Yeah.
And when I had the C-section, they had. I remember laying on the table, kind of being awake. They'd taken Thomas out, and I remember the nurse kind of chiding my doctor and saying, "Can you close this up?" And joking with him and then he said, "Well, I'm having a hard time. Her tissues are really slippery."
Mm.
And I remember that being such an odd statement then, and I was so out of it on all the anesthesia drugs, but still, I remember thinking, "Gosh, that's kind of odd." And so he acknowledged, even mid surgery, that he was having a really hard time putting me back together, and ended up losing a lot of blood and had the blood transfusion, and just that whole the delivery was unique, and a lot of women have crazy delivery stories. So I just thought I was just one of those women that had a crazy delivery story.
Hmm.
Um, So my doctor, okay, so fast forward back to this rheumatologist who thinks that I have vasculitis
Hmm.
in 2015. He's putting together those pieces along with the fact that my mom, who passed away at the age of 37, she had a splenic artery aneurysm that was seemed to be completely unprompted by anything else. And so he's thinking, okay, something's going on here. And so he says she has vasculitis. It's an autoimmune inflammation of your vascular tissues. And so he starts a program to put it in remission. He says there's no cure, but we can put it in remission. And so I'm in the hospital, and they start me on a really aggressive round of steroid treatment, along with Cipro, antibiotic, and then chemotherapy.
Oh
And
my God.
so, right? And I'm looking back at that, and I'm just like, that is just crazy that I survived, because those three things together are like a suicide pill for someone with vascular EDS. I mean, from what I understand. So Cipro is, what is it, the Levaquins or whatever that
Oh
class of
yeah, the fluoroquinolones.
antibiotics. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Fluoroquinolines. That is not really safe for us to take, and then
Oh my
steroids,
gosh.
which ramped my blood pressure up, and then of course chemo, which just weakens your entire body. So those three things together, we were like, okay, we're gonna kick this thing in the tuchus, and as we thought we were doing the right thing. And I really do. I hold no animosity towards either one of those doctors, the ER doctor and the rheumatologist, because they both were just so committed to not accepting the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think that they, really thought, with the information they had at the time, that they were doing the best that they could, and I think that it's really easy for those of us in the vEDS community to be angry with doctors and to feel like they don't know, and they don't know because they don't know. I think we're living in this season of awareness about our disorder, where it's not like cancer, where there's been years and years and years and years of research being done on it. I mean, we're kind of in the beginning stages of that, and
Hmm.
I'm so thankful for the work of the vEDS Collaborative and the doctors involved in that. And as we kind of build more research, but it would be really easy to go back and tell that rheumatologist, what, you really messed up. But I really think, really, you almost killed me. But I think that he really was doing, and I really, I liked him as a doctor. I felt like he was attentive, and he
He
was
was
paying
trying.
attention to me. He was trying. Yeah, he was trying. He didn't nail it, but he was trying.
Yeah.
And so I went through that first round of chemo, and I was supposed to come back in a month, and I was going to do 6 months of chemo. But before the next month was up, my left carotid artery ruptured, and you and I were chatting about this a few minutes yesterday, but I say ruptured. Those of us in the vEDS community will recognize this as not as a rupture, but a carotid cavernous fistula. That's the
Hmm.
fancy name for it. But when you say that, most people don't understand what it means.
Yeah.
And so, so I just, when I am talking about it to someone who might not know that, then I just say my carotid artery ruptured. And I was a yoga teacher at the time, and I was assisting my yoga teacher in a big class of hers that she was teaching. And I had squatted down, and I remember feeling that day, that I just felt really off. And the steroids in general were just. Have you ever been on steroids?
Yeah.
Okay, so they make you crazy, and like they really do.
Yeah.
Like, they made me crazy, and I was like super one. Listen, that was okay. That was in the fall, and my son wanted to be. Let's see, he was 8 at the time, and he wanted to be toothless. From the
How to Train Your Dragon.
yes, he wanted to be toothless for Halloween. And I kid you not, at noon, I went to Walmart, and on Halloween, I went to Walmart at noon and bought a sewing machine and all the materials I would need to make this homemade toothless costume. And by 5 o'clock that night, he had a homemade toothless costume.
Oh
I,
my
I was
gosh.
a crazy woman. And I remember my husband, and that's not me at all. Like, I've never been super, driven with energy, in any shape or form. And my husband was like, "Who are you?" And so, I mean, I think that was just the effect of the steroids making me kind of, in hyperdrive and everything. And
Hmm.
Um, and so I remember feeling that morning when my carotid ruptured, that I just felt like I couldn't settle down, and my heart was beating, and like I already felt really off that morning. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I show up to the studio and we're in class, and I squatted down to place my hands on top of someone else's hands to assist them in a particular pose. And when I stood up, I felt something pop in my left ear, what felt like my left ear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already had, some migraine symptoms kind of going on. I struggled with migraines my entire life, and now we know it's probably related to the weird blood flow in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so I excused myself to the back of the studio, and I immediately started hearing that classic whoosh in your ear that you hear with the carotid fistula.
Yeah.
And so in time with my heartbeat, so heart would beat, and I would hear just this whoosh going on in my ear. And at first I thought I ruptured an eardrum or something. Um, and then as the time went on, I realized this. I don't think this is good. I think something is really wrong here. You just have that sense of doom.
Yeah.
And so I drove myself to the hospital, which I don't recommend. People do not be like me. But I think I mean, really don't do that. But I think in the moment, it was an awareness of, well, I can drive, and I was really awake and present in the moment. And I needed to get to the hospital fast, and I didn't want to wait or call, and here's another thing, disturb or burden someone,
Uh-huh.
because why do we do this to ourselves? I didn't want to burden or disturb my teacher and the students in the class, when what I should have said was, can someone drive me to the hospital, or can someone call 911 for me?
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, I still wasn't fully aware of what the weight of what we were dealing with. And so we get to the hospital, and they they run tests, and meanwhile my sinus cavity in my left eye is filling up with blood because my carotid had ruptured. And so it was starting to swell, and I couldn't see out of that eye. And they were really having a hard time trying to figure out again what to do with me. And so they said, we're going to send you to two of the more teaching the more equipped hospitals in the area. And the hospital that I was at is a trauma hospital, but they still were sending me to a better one. I'm in central North Carolina, and so they sent me to UNC. And by the time I arrived, it was early in the morning, and the doctor that was on call there was a doctor from Europe. She was from Paris. And I consider this such a blessing, because she recognized vascular EDS immediately, where no other doctor had seen it at all.
Yeah.
And so she felt my skin. She looked at my medical history. She asked me about my mom's history. She checked the hypermobility in my small joints. And she said, I think you have she called it collagen. And she said, I think this is what you have. And when we're done, I want you to get genetic testing, but we have to get through this procedure first. And so she went through the embolization procedure to basically create a man-made dam and block off, the flow of my carotid artery. And it was crazy here. And this is why I consider this such a blessing that she was aware of it, because that procedure is pretty dangerous
Yeah.
for someone with vascular EDS, because how they do it is they enter through your femoral artery and go snake, coil all the way up, and they place, I mean, I can't remember how many like the weight of the amount of platinum coil that I have in my head at the moment, but it's a lot. And so they snake all of that up through your femoral artery all the way into your sinus cavity. And so the procedure itself is really, really tenuous, I guess might be the right word. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but it was risky. But she knew it. And so because she recognized vascular EDS, she knew to be really, really careful. And so she did. And so they actually did the procedure the full surgery in two procedures, because my femoral artery started shutting down during the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And so she backed out and sent me home for 3 days, which was the longest 3 days of my life, because it wasn't complete, and there was still the whooshing and so much pain, and that I didn't even think I was going to make it to the second surgery.
Yeah.
But I did. And she finished the surgery, and which was a success. And then that was November of 2015. And then in December, I had an appointment with the genetics department at UNC, and they did the blood test, and the test results came back in January, and that was when it was officially confirmed that I did have vascular EDS with a COL3A1 genetic mutation that I had inherited from my mom, and she had a spontaneous mutation. So hers was not. She didn't. My grandparents lived long and full lives, both of them, and so they reasoned that her mutation was spontaneous and that I inherited it from her.
How old were you at this time?
I was 39. I was 38 when. Yeah, yes, I was 38 when everything kind of started hitting the fan in the fall of 2015, and then I turned 39 in March of 2016. So between my 38th and 39th birthday.
So when they told you, what did they tell you about what it meant for your life?
So lots of things. That's a great question. So I met with some doctors who were pretty much doomsday, and and I think I'm trying to remember what division they were from. I think they were from the genetics department. And they were like, no more kids, which at this point we were like, well, duh. But we're not really going through anything that's going to take us medically traumatic at all anymore. So, but no more kids. No, they said, contact sports. No. You have to be aware when you're going into surgery going forward that you are fragile, and surgery will be very, very risky for you. Medical procedures will be risky for you. So we're not going to do anything surgically unless it's life-threatening. Mm-hmm. So, I had some that delivered just the really doomsday part of it, and to say, there is no cure. I remember sitting with our geneticist and when we got the diagnosis, and so we said, great, this is 2016, and medicine has advanced to leaps and bounds. What treatments do I pursue? What medicines do I take? And I remember, I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he was very kind and very compassionate, and he just skipped a tiny bit of a beat, and then he said, there is no cure or treatment for vascular EDS. And he said, the thing that I can tell you is to prepare your bucket list and live your life well, because your average life expectancy is 48.
Wow.
And so I got that doomsday message. But then the doctor from Paris, and that these are this is what I cling to most. She said, you can live a normal life. You just have to have some limitations now, and you have to be aware of your limitations. But you can live and have a very full life. And then there was another set of doctors that came in, and to be honest with you, Katie, I'm not even sure what their role was. I think they were just doing rounds after my surgeries just to check in on things. But I remember really struggling with anxiety in the hospital and wondering how in the world I was going to manage that. And it was probably a blessing, because in the hospital before I was discharged, I had a couple of weeks where the whole vascular EDS thing really wasn't real until the diagnosis came in. Like, we knew that's where this was leading, but I wouldn't let my mind go there, because I was still very much in recovery mode from my my carotid surgery procedures, and that was a lot to manage. And so I think my body just kind of protected itself and my mind before I really launched into processing what this diagnosis meant. Yeah. But even just dealing with the anxiety of it in the hospital before I was discharged, these two doctors came in to do their rounds, and they were so gracious, and they said, you know what, you need to start small and don't tackle everything, and take melatonin, you need good sleeps over the next 3 months. Just take melatonin every single night, because that's going to help you get rest, and that's going to help your body and your mind fight the anxiety and heal. And they said, take things in small baby steps. And they were like, you're not going to get rid of anxiety every day. So, I want you to consider one small thing that you can do in every day that will help you with that. they were just, I don't know, they were really empathetic. I was really blessed with a team of doctors that had a lot of good empathy and great bedside manner, and really helpful in kind of helping me manage the offshoots of what had actually happened.
Yeah, no kidding.
So yeah, yeah.
That's so it was November that you were in the hospital,
Mhm.
and then December you saw the geneticist,
Mhm.
and then January you got your results, or March.
January.
Okay.
January, yeah. Yeah, January. March was my birthday. So yeah, they called in January and they delivered the news over the phone. And we kind of knew, that especially given my mom's medical history, which, she died in 1988. So back then, I mean, this was on nobody's radar, and it
Yeah.
was just this big, giant unknown for her and for our family. And so it was a bit of a blessing to have the diagnosis to wrap some closure around her experience,
Hmm.
and what had happened, because there were talks of medical negligence, and did the doctors do something wrong, and what in the world happened, because she was so healthy one day and gone the next. And so it gave my family some closure to say, oh, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And I think that the call with the geneticist was difficult, but like I said, we kind of knew that this is where it was leading.
Hmm.
And then the next 3 months after that diagnosis were pretty dark for me
Yeah.
emotionally. Um, it takes time to grieve and process a diagnosis like that, and
It does.
uh,
Yeah.
that that was that was hard.
So did anybody else in your family inherit this?
Um, Not that we're aware of. So I have my family history is kind of all over the place, but I have lots of wonderful stepbrothers. I have one biological half brother, and so we share the same mom, and that's
Okay.
that's it. It was just him and me that she had, and he's 6 years younger than me, and he has had his share of some medical issues, but none of which they think is related to vascular EDS.
Okay.
And yeah, his doctors are aware of it, but they don't think that he has it. He has a daughter, too. So, but they're not as concerned for him.
Okay.
And then my son, who is 12, we had him tested this summer because he plays hockey,
Hmm.
and he was moving into a checking division this fall. So lots of contact happening for him in the sports field. And we just wanted to be really wise with that. And he had not shown any symptoms, early manifestations of it as he was growing up, but we just wanted to be sure, and so we had him tested, and he does not have vascular Ehlers-Danlos. We are very, very thankful that this ends with me
That is
and that it
wonderful
doesn't skip
news.
generations. Yeah, it is. It is. It's really, really, really wonderful news. Wonderful news.
That's awesome. So if you were talking to somebody who is either going through potentially having vEDS and awaiting a
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, or who just got their diagnosis, what kind of advice would you give them?
Mm. Um, so going through the diagnosis process, number one, I think that you have to be your own advocate, and you have to be willing to educate yourself. And Dr. Google is not the answer. So Google will freak you out. So, I mean, I understand the desire to search and to glean information, but I wouldn't necessarily rely on a Google search to get you there. I would connect with someone in the vascular EDS community, or a genetics, doctor, to give you materials, from the NIH, or something that's a little bit more substantial to understand the disorder.
Mhm.
I am definitely, my geneticist discussed this with me before we did my test, and he said, some people they like more information is power, and some people more information is crippling. And I am very much an information is power type of person. And so, I would ask someone who is walking through the diagnosis which type of person you are, because one of the things that he wanted to make sure that I understood was, if I got the diagnosis, there still was nothing that we could do. I mean, I think, to me, awareness is everything, and I think that is going has the potential to save my life if I have a future major medical event. But he said there are some that would, some types of personalities that would receive that type of information, and it would really be challenging to move past the what if, and that some people would live their life better just not knowing. If there's nothing you can do about it, don't know. I disagree. I'm definitely in the camp of, I think more information and more awareness is knowledge and power and life saving. And so, first, if you're that type of person, then I think, equip yourself with information so that you can be your own advocate. Get connected with, support groups and organizations that are advocating for vascular EDS issues, because they are unique. And I think that they manifest themselves very differently from patient to patient. You've probably already observed that just interviewing some of our stories and how different they are, and, different in the comorbidities. I don't have a whole lot of comorbidities associated with vascular EDS, outside of migraines, and I have fatigue, and I have overall joint and body pain, particularly when weather systems come in. I'm really sensitive to changes in barometric pressure. But I'm getting a little bit off track here, but I think that that knowledge is a good thing. So equip yourself with people who, surround yourself with organizations. Do the research with organizations that are actually advocating for issues that are specific to vascular EDS. What I also would recommend that you do is to not assume that every type of every symptom and manifestation of the collective Ehlers-Danlos syndromes will apply to you, because that was one of the things that kind of threw me into paralyzation mode in between, or right after my diagnosis. Was I started looking at like let's say the Ehlers-Danlos Society, and all the things. It's Ehlers-Danlos is such a nebulous disorder, that it just can manifest in so many different ways. And just because patient A experienced this doesn't mean that you will also. And then that's why I say, avoid Dr. Google, because Dr. Google is going to tell you every possible thing that could go wrong. And you might have 90% of those things that go wrong, or you might have 10. So I guess, do what works for your soul in managing the acquisition of knowledge. And that, okay, too much knowledge is going to freak me out, but this amount of knowledge is going to make me feel like I'm in control and I can advocate for myself. And then I have a solid conversation with your primary doctor, because that's who manages my care. And that's what I've heard over and over and over again from my geneticists, is that, they're like, we have to have our specialists, our cardiologist, and, our vascular surgeon, and, all those things, that if something does go wrong, but my primary doctor is the one that I communicate with and go through the most. And so if you're not comfortable with your primary, get a primary that you're comfortable with, and find someone. Don't settle for the status quo. Find someone that you feel comfortable interacting with and who is comfortable asking questions. And this is one of the reasons why I love my primary, because she will flat out tell you, I don't know anything about this, but she's not afraid to learn. And so, she will ask the questions, and she'll have a conversation with my geneticist to educate herself. So, get comfortable with a doctor that, that you feel like will be on your team, and don't waste time on doctors that aren't.
Yeah.
What other things would I say? I think the anxiety piece of it for me is really big. And I think that is, outside of just educating and advocating for yourself, and not being afraid to ask your questions, and always be I'm terrible with idioms. I always mess them up. But like what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Squeaky can't. Okay, good. I did it right. Okay, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Like, don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. But all of those things for self-advocacy that are important, particularly in this day and age with with the way in the U.S. at least, with the way our medicine, our medical care is set up, which is kind of nuts. But that's a whole nother conversation. But then the anxiety piece of it for me is really, really important, because I think that I mean, for me personally, that was what I struggled with. And listen, I mean, I taught people how to live healthily in their bodies for a living. I mean, I taught people how to live stress free as a yoga teacher. You know, that's most of my students came in because they needed help with anxiety. I had all these great tools to help them. And you know, I think that was something that kind of hit me in the face. It was totally unexpected, and I was even though I had all these great tools, I really was ill prepared to address it in my own body and mind. And so, you know, some of those things that I would say, looking back now, are, you know, self care has to be a priority.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the anxiety piece of it, like that doctor said, start small. Don't, you know, anxiety for me kind of, it's like this big ball that kind of rolls and gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and you really don't realize it's there until the ball kind of explodes. Like I don't know, that's how I would articulate how it feels in my body.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, so I think that start small, knowing that you're not going to tackle all of it at the same time, and recognizing that you're not alone. So many people deal with anxiety, and this type of diagnosis is, I mean, is not easy. And so cut yourself some slack and realize that what we are up against is really challenging. I mean, this is not a cakewalk at all. And it's okay to say, I am not okay. You know, it's okay to say, I'm really struggling here and I need help. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be the first one to tell you that I see a therapist. I have anxiety medicine that I keep in my purse, that I, you know, take when I need it, when I can't get those anxiety, those panic attack symptoms to settle down. You know, I have a really strong village support group of friends and family members that I can call on. You know, I have, you know, I know, like, you know, if I'm getting ready to hit a panic attack, you know, I'm going to put my hands in hot water to kind of stop that response and settle my body down. Like, I think the approach to anxiety for me that I learned, that I had to learn during that season, right after my diagnosis when things were really dark, you know, is that has to be a holistic job. You know, it's not, it has to be, start small, sure, but it has to be, you know, this giant toolbox of things that you can pull from. And I'm, you know, a very faithful person, and prayer is certainly a part of that for me that brings me great peace. You know, so, you know, fill your toolbox with things that bring you peace, and that work to help you manage that, because when, you know, when you're full of anxiety, you're not going to be able to advocate well for yourself, because, you know, you're not going to think as clearly or feel as good. And I mean, anxiety is a hot mess.
Yeah.
But just, you know, be really careful establishing that holistic thing. And I think that the other two things that I would say to someone who is either walking through this diagnosis or has it, I think that it has taught me two things, which I think are really valuable. Number one is that I think this world has a lot to learn from people who have to say no to things. And I go back to what, you know, my Parisian surgeon said, you know, you can live a normal life, you just have limitations. And I think that we live in a society and a culture that is always yes, 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 do everything. You know, busy is so glorified in our culture. And I think that our culture has a lot to learn from those of us who, where busyness is actually life threatening. And so, you know, there are a lot of things that I really want to do, but I have to be very strategic with my time management. And I have to say yes to the things that are most important to me and no to the things that don't matter. And vascular EDS has taught me how to do that really well.
Mm-hmm.
It will teach you quickly how to prioritize your life. But I also think that that's the perspective that our culture needs. And so, you know, that's a good thing. That we can give to our community and the world around us as a reminder that, you know, you don't have to do it all, and you can take a nap every day, and that's okay. And, you know, limitations are not a hindrance to living your life fully. They are helping you live it sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainable choices are huge for me, and I'm always asking that question: is this sustainable for me? Is this sustainable for my family? And I think the other encouragement that vascular EDS has taught me is, you know, is that bucket list. You know, it's what my geneticist said, you know, prepare your bucket list and live your life well. And it really made me start thinking, well, what is my bucket list? And, you know, I used to think that bucket lists were, you know, something that we did when we retired, but but they're not. It's really taught me how to live my life in the present moment and be, um, really attentive to that. And that brings great joy. Um, and I think vascular EDS is awful and it's nasty, and I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. And it is not a story that I wish that I had to carry. It's not a story that I want for my life, but because it is, it has taught me to live my life with a perspective of gratitude for every single day that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and an intention of wanting to make the most out of every single day and memories with my family. And that, I don't know, Katie, I think people search their entire lives for that kind of perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that is a bit of a blessing in disguise that we have, because we don't take anything for granted. And that in turn makes for a really sweet and precious life most days. Some days I'm under the covers and I'm crying because I don't want to have this disease. I don't want to have this disorder. I'm not saying every day is picket fences and rainbows. And it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing grief process of how to manage it. But most days feel really, really sweet because I'm aware of how precious it is that I'm still here and kicking and alive. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it does give you that perspective and that, like, I mean, before I was diagnosed, I would tell people because I had a big family
Mm,
that I grew up with all my grandparents and some of my great grandparents,
mm-hmm,
and I saw them all pass away.
mm,
And so I grew up with this mentality that you can't wait until retirement to do the things that you want to do.
right.
And I would tell people that, and they'd be like, oh, yeah, but I only have 10 years left until I,
Mm,
get 30 years with the state or wherever. I'm like, but you can't count on that.
yeah,
Like, you can plan for it, but you can't put off everything you want to do
yeah,
until you get there. Because
yeah.
what if something happens? Like, one of my grandparents passed away, I think it was like 3 months after he retired. And he
Mm,
had waited his whole life to do these things that he wanted to do.
oh, yeah,
And he
yeah,
never got to do them.
yeah.
So
Well,
then you live with regret, and like trying not to live with regret
yeah.
is so important.
It really is, and I think the reality. I think for us with vascular EDS, we're aware of our mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the deal: ain't none of us getting out of this life alive. I mean it, and I don't I don't like to talk about that with people. Nobody wants to hear that or talk about it, but
Mm-hmm.
that's true. I mean, the only difference between us and someone who doesn't have vascular EDS is we probably know how we're leaving this world, and it may happen sooner than we'd like it to. It might not.
Yeah.
I mean, it might not. But in the meantime, what are we going to do with those days? And I think, like you said with your grandparents, my father-in-law passed away suddenly in March. And I mean, he was healthy. I mean, healthy one day and, heart attack the next, and
Yeah.
just completely unexpected. And so, it really makes it easy for us to be spontaneous and to do things that don't always make sense. I mean, prime example of that, last Monday, my son came home when he was in first grade and he said, Mom, I want to be a primatologist. And I had to look up the dictionary and in the dictionary to see what that actually meant. And a primatologist is someone who studies primates because he wanted to work with monkeys. And that's kind of been a childhood dream that he's had since then.
Yeah.
And so he really idolized Jane Goodall when he was young. He read an early reader about her and just really looked up to her work, and she's such a tremendous role model for him since then. And we thought it would be a fleeting thing, but it hasn't. I mean, he's really hung on to it. And so a couple years ago, I set a reminder in my Google Notes to check her event calendar and see if we could get to one of her events. And this summer, she was coming to DC, which is close enough to where we are. And so on Monday, he ditched school. We took him out of school, which is 100% worth it, and drove him up to DC so he could hear his childhood idol, hear
Oh,
her story in person. It's those kinds of things that we probably never would have done before my diagnosis.
yeah.
But afterwards, that's a really easy decision. And then that kind of stuff that's what I mean by it makes life really sweet because I got to watch him, watch his face while he listened to her, and it was such an incredible moment. That was a bucket list moment for him, and I got to make that happen for him.
Yeah.
And that was pretty special. So we try to do stuff like that, a lot, and it's not all big stuff either. I mean, it's the little things. It's
Mm-hmm.
making dinner together and sitting down at the dinner table, or having a conversation with friends, or ditching the to-do list in your work pile to know that your family needs you in this moment, or something else that matters.
Yeah.
You become really good at saying, this matters and this doesn't, and that feels pretty empowering, especially living with something that feels pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today and to everybody.
You are more than welcome. Thanks so much for having me on, and just sending gentle hugs to everybody that's listening. And just such a privilege to root everybody along together in this life that we have with vascular EDS.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Katie.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. This was Staying Connected, and this was Heather. I have episodes coming out on the last Sunday of every month, so stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Share this podcast to help us raise awareness of vascular EDS, and we'll talk to you next month.